All right, everybody, thanks for joining me today. We're going to go over some information about HOAs. A lot of people I work with just don't seem to have a lot of insight on what they can do within their HOA and how it affects them as a homeowner. So I'm going to jump into it. I'm going to cover this fairly quickly. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll post this out on YouTube. If you have questions or topics you want me to cover, let me know in the comments somewhere in there and I'll pick up on it. So let's get started here. So the very first little bit about me, I've been a realtor now for about 6 years. I was a real estate investor and property manager before that. Also custom home builder for many years and a home inspector. And back in the day, we also owned an Arby's franchise. So today, some of the things to know. So what we're going to discuss, first of all, just kind of as a side note here, I'm not giving insurance or legal or financial advice with this, so be sure to consult the appropriate people that's their area of expertise. But I'll touch on some things that'll give you reason to contact those people probably. So, going to just the definition of HOA. There are sub HOAs. Go over some pros and cons of HOAs, structures of the HOA. How you're going to work within your HOA. Something about your HOA dues. Kind of what are they? You pay your HOA dues and wonder what in the world is all that money going to. Then, topic I find is kind of a problem sometimes is if you're insured correctly for the HOA you're in. And then I have just a little homework assignment just to kind of for you guys to focus on to go over. So, homeowners association. First of all, I want to emphasize that it is the homeowners association. A lot of times there's comments made about HOAs and oh, the HOA isn't this or is doing that. Remember, it's each of us in a homeowners association that has responsibility to affect change. If we don't like what's going on, it's our responsibility to do something about that. And so remember, it's homeowners association. It's not HOA. We're not complaining about the people in charge making the calls. If we don't like the calls they're making, it's up to us to help step in and be part of the process. So kind of some of the pros and cons. Good thing about having HOA, they're well-maintained neighborhoods, which helps our property values as homeowners. We also, in some HOAs, you have access to more amenities and services that you wouldn't have otherwise if you're in just a neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA. And if certain HOAs, they cover a lot of the maintenance responsibilities, take care of the outside for you. Some do, some don't, just depends on the HOA. And of course, the cons of HOAs. Everybody knows there's those monthly dues. Sometimes there's some special assessments come out of nowhere that can be quite shocking to some people if you're not prepared for those. Or if your HOA isn't being run properly, those can be very detrimental to the financial stability of the HOA itself. Of course, they have restrictions on what you can do with your property. There's a risk of management or lack of transparency. Maybe you don't have to be able to make the decisions you'd like to about your own home. And there's things around the board decisions they make about changing rules around the properties, what you can and can't do, and other things associated with it. So for the homeowners association, they're set up basically like nonprofit corporations. I'm not going to get into all the details here. You kind of read on the screen there through the details. Um, Here's the kind of the general overview of what a homeowners association looks like. First of all, it's made up of all the homeowners. Then you vote in a board of directors, which consists of a president, vice president, secretary, and a treasurer. Minimum, usually three people in position. You can have five, seven. It depends on what your bylaws are within the HOA, how many people are going to sit on that board. And it's important to know that each of the homeowners has a vote in who becomes these board of directors. And these guys are the ultimate decision makers. And there are board meetings that you'll attend. And we'll get into that in just a minute here. So there's membership, as I said, of all the homeowners, board of directors. They have optional committees that'll be over landscaping, architectural, social events, those kind of things. There's some more detail there on the screen if you want to look at that. There is a big thing that's kind of missed by some of the HOAs, and it's you'll see it here. It says budget and reserves. Reserves, there's special studies done for HOAs that need to be done because depending on the HOA you're in, sometimes HOAs, you guys own the roads and you have to maintain and take care of those roads and seal the roads and other things and stuff. And so it's important to know exactly what your HOA is and isn't responsible for. If you look on the street signs in your HOA, or even just around neighborhoods as you're going around, you'll see blue signs, street signs. Those are privately owned roads versus the green signs, which are the public roads. And so if you're walking around your HOA and you see those blue signs, there's a real possibility that those roads have to be taken care of by your HOA. And so those reserves are basically a big chunk of extra money you keep in your budget to handle unforeseen things or bigger maintenance and repair items that come up. Um, there's some legal compliance things you need to do within Utah. We'll go on. Here's one of the important things to know about HOAs. Thank goodness this came about last year. Love it or hate it. It was good for HOAs because in 2025, there's actually some legislation and the rules around HOAs. For a long time, HOAs kind of could do anything and everything. And so this ombudsman law came about, which required some things to be more transparent, like the transfer and reinvestment fees, or kind of a shock when either you buy into an HOA or more importantly, like when you go to sell, there's some individuals aren't even aware these exist or how much, or that they've changed during their ownership of their property. So be aware of those. And sometimes agents or people they use those interchangeably, and they're actually two separate items. But some people will be talking about a transfer fee when they may mean a reinvestment fee or vice versa. So be sure you know what those are. Some are a flat fee, some are a percentage of the purchase price of your home when you sell or when you buy. Also, with this, they capped some of the late fees. The late fees were kind of getting crazy on some of the HOAs, the amount they would charge and how long and so forth. And so that brought about, they had to be more careful with that. Got into the design review guidelines, some of the limits they could do with rules. They can't just go crazy like they did in the past. And then brought in more of the ownership has to be on board with some of the types of changes that are made there. So you can you read the details there, and there's some references there of where you can look up more details on these items. And then it talks about the reserve funds there, and the fact that you have access to a lot of the documents. You're allowed to see all the financials of what's going on in the HOA. That's always been a thing, but some it's been very hard to access in the past, so they're cleaning that up, making it easier. Flag and sign rights. There was some really stepping over the line in some HOAs and stuff, what people were allowed to do and not to do. And so they've stepped in and helped there a bit. And the board meetings and the notices about board meetings, it varies as far as like when they have to give notice or how often or how early and stuff, from one HOA to the next. And then some of the real life shockers, you've seen some of these, heard some of these in the news and stuff, and all of a sudden, somebody's gone in and had $100 HOA. Their dues were $100 a month, and then all of a sudden it jumped to 200 or whatever. And also, I won't mention specific areas, but you can read those there. But they've seen some significant jumps in HOA fees or special assessments and stuff that had to be shared across the homeowners in an HOA due to, maybe mismanaging the HOA. We got a lot of people in HOAs that are new to HOAs. They don't even know what they're up to. And so it's important to know if your HOA is being run correctly, whoever's overseeing it, your board of directors and so forth. So those HOA dues, what are they used for? Well, these are just some examples I got for you. If you didn't know, it depends on your HOA. So one thing you'll see on occasion, and just as an example, over in Harriman, Rosecrest is an HOA, but within Rosecrest, this is a very large area in the community over there. There's a lot of existing HOAs under that, and those are sub HOAs. So each of those sub HOAs pay a yearly payment on your, if you were within one of those, you pay your HOA fee to your HOA, but also once a year, there's a payment that's made to the Rosecrest HOA. So that's kind of an example of that. So you may or may not have a yearly payment on your HOA. Just depends on where you're at. Monies, then those dues go. Well, typically, a lot of the times, because of the way they work, you'll the HOAs hire management companies to kind of oversee basically what's going on in the neighborhood as far as landscaping and taking care of clubhouses and pools and all that stuff or whatever. You hire a management company to just kind of take care of all that for you. And I kind of glossed over it, missed it earlier, but the board of directors is made up of homeowners, and they are typically volunteers and just people trying to help out in the community in the neighborhoods you live in. And so it's important to put the right people in as the homeowners to vote in the people that have some of the, I guess, relative experience, so you can have some good management of your HOA. And if you don't like what's going on in the HOA, it's important they have board meetings, on a regular basis. It depends on your bylaws, how often those are and how many are required and so forth. But it's important to find out when those are. Make sure you're on the email list, the group text, whatever it does, whatever works in your HOA, I guess, how you guys communicate, because that changes too. But show up and attend those meetings. And when you attend the meetings, don't just go with your complaints, go with solutions. You'll find that works better for everybody. Talk to your neighbors, see what they like, what they don't. Work together as a community, because remember, it's homeowners. It's not the HOA that's doing this or that. It's you, the homeowners, that are doing this or that. Yes, the board is the ones in charge of making the directions for the HOA and the decisions, but they need to know what those directions are, what those decisions are, according to you, the homeowners. And if you're never there showing up to the meetings and never expressing your opinions and bringing solutions, they just do what the best they can with amongst those three or four people sitting in a room and hope for the best. I've sat on boards for different reasons and stuff, and that's typically what happens is there's a lot of people that are upset after a decision's made, but here you are sitting in rooms, there's six people trying to decide for, 50 or 100 or hundreds of people, and you really don't have a good consensus of what the population is that you're dealing with because nobody shows up, attends, or makes any comments. So, but do keep in mind they are donating their time. They're not professional HOA management people necessarily. So, be considerate of that. So jump back in here, you can be paying for snow plowing, landscaping. Some of the HOAs, they call it poop control, patrol, to pick up after the owners that don't pick after their dogs. Pay, the pool maintenance, clubhouse, security, like security camera systems around maintenance and clubhouse areas and stuff like that, or even um, some HOAs actually have security cameras. Also, they typically help pay for the insurance that covers the board members against liability. And give or take what HOA you're in, it could be helping pay for insurance on the structures. And I'll go over that in just a little bit more here in a second. And also like playground equipment and maintenance. And I'm sure you found other things in your HOA that your dues are being paid towards. So HOA insurance, I'm going to bring this up just as a quick thing because I see that a lot of, especially town homeowners, do not understand this. This can also apply to single family homes sometimes in HOAs, but insurance. You need to know very specifically how your HOA is insured, what the HOA insurance is covering. Like in the townhome circumstances, a lot of them, there is like an umbrella policy. I guess you say I'm not professional in insurance, but it's like an umbrella policy that covers the buildings of the HOA, and that includes the buildings that you actually are ownership in as far as your unit. And so if you own a townhome and there's four or five of you in there, that building actually is likely being insured by a policy that is under the HOA. So really all you need to pay for is what they call an HO6 policy, that basically covers you and the contents of it. It's kind of like, I guess, been likened to a renter's policy or a renter's insurance policy. And the kind of the way the insurance agents more than once have described it to me is if you were to turn your house or your townhome upside down and shake it, anything that fell out, that's what the HO6 policy covers. And basically, whatever else is, being turned upside down, the building itself and all that is actually covered by the HO3, or well, not the HO3 policy, but the policy that the HOA is paying for. And so some of your dues are paying for that insurance, the combined insurance or the combined dues that each of you pay for are also paying for that policy. So your HO6 policy that you have as a homeowner, like in a townhome, it's quite inexpensive usually per year. And so that's part of why that insurance is so cheap is because your dues is also paying a little bit toward your insurance there too. And so I had a client where I helped them sell their townhome and they'd actually had a kitchen fire in there and they were quite surprised that when they went to do their insurance and stuff that they're like, but their insurance actually had very little to do with it. It was actually the insurance company for the HOA that came in and took care of most all of it. And then their HO6 policy helped take care of like some of the furniture and other items and stuff that were damaged by smoke damage. Luckily, it was a small fire, so it was taken care of. But it caused enough damage that the entire flooring was taken out of the house and the whole kitchen was redone. So it takes very little to do a lot of damage. So be sure that you understand your HOAs. Your HOA, and this goes for single family homes. Sometimes there are some circumstances. I had a client down in St. George. Um, they're single family homes, but it's the HOA is actually covering the buildings in that circumstance, which isn't typical if you have a single family home in an HOA. It's usually your own deal there that you're on the HL3 policy or just a regular homeowner's policy if you're used to that. And so be sure if you're in an HOA, make sure that you're covering that correctly. And so why is that so critical? The one critical thing is if you are like say in a townhome or if you're in a situation where the HOA is paying the major insurance on the building and so forth, there's a deductible that you as the homeowner have to cover. And those deductibles can be very expensive. They're typically anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 or more. And the higher that deductible is for you, helps keep the premium lower on the insurance that the HOA is paying for the whole community. And so you need to make sure that if you have an HO6 policy, that that is covering the deductible that will be required of the insurance company that is taking care of the buildings in the HOA. So, and then, like I say, that deductible can be 10,000, 20, 30,000. It just depends. So you need to know and check with your HOA. Say, hey, what's my HO6 policy? What deductible does that need to cover? And so don't just assume and be careful because that deductible through board meetings, things like that might change. Another reason to make sure you're attending those meetings because they may take it from 10 to a 20 or 30,000 in order to help reduce the premium that the HOA is paying for their big policy that's covering everybody's building, which tries to help, keep your HOA dues down. That's why they do that. And so stay on top of that so you don't get caught out by that. So this is your homework. Find out who your board members are if you don't know. Find out when those board meetings are and attend. And if you can't attend, have somebody in your household. Basically each homeowner within the community should have like one vote typically per parcel is what they kind of tie it down to a lot of times, or per home, so to speak. So somebody in there within your home, attend it, or if you have a neighbor that can attend, give you the notes, you guys talk and whatnot, so you know what's going up. And like I said before, take solutions, not problems. You'll get a lot further in your meetings, and it'll make your community that much better. Also, there's a lot of times there's a portal that you have access to within your HOA. There's pretty much all the information you need should be in there as far as the financials, the budgets. They use it for communication, landscaping, architectural rules, all kinds of stuff in there. So get to know if you haven't really been on your portal and looked around or played around on that, do that to get to know that really well. Then again, check your insurance policy and make sure that it's in line with it. It needs to be that you have the correct policy and that if it's an HO6, make sure it's covering that deductible. for the HOA's policy. And as I said, remember the board members are volunteers and your neighbors next door, so be kind and respectful to each other and do what you can to get the most out of your HOA. So if you have any questions, drop in the comments. I'm going to put this on my YouTube channel. I'll answer some questions here in a minute. But I hope this has been helpful. If it has, just let me know. If you have any other topics you want me to cover, just let me know. Here's my information. So we'll get on with some questions now, but I'm going to stop the recording at this point, and then we'll move on. Thank you for being here.